Have you ever noticed how they say the economy is growing, but your wallet doesn't feel the difference? While the numbers show progress, Americans are spending more to live less. Housing, transportation, and healthcare costs are out of control, and no one is talking about how this directly impacts you. But that changes today. I'm going to reveal what's really happening and, more importantly, how you can turn the tables and protect your financial future. While graphs point upward, millions of Americans feel poorer. That's because economic growth doesn't automatically translate to more money in people's pockets. It's like playing a card game where the winning hand always goes to the same players. What seems like progress for the overall economy can feel like an invisible weight making life harder for the majority. This disconnect directly affects how people perceive their quality of life. If GDP rises but everyday costs rise even faster, what's the real benefit? That's where frustration builds, because it's not just about statistics, it's about paying bills, saving for the future, and finding peace of mind. Is there a way to reverse this sense of stagnation? Between 2020 and 2024, prices rose by an average of 21%, while household incomes grew by only 20%. It may seem like a small gap, but that's exactly what's squeezing purchasing power. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole at the bottom. You work harder, but it's never enough. For many families, this means cutting back or relying on credit cards, creating a tough cycle to break. That 1% difference hides an even bigger problem. While some items, like food, grew in line with inflation, others, like housing and insurance, skyrocketed. This creates a sense of helplessness for those who rely solely on their wages. If income isn't enough, where can you find alternatives to tip the scales in your favor? Housing, transportation, food, insurance, and healthcare. These five giants dominate American budgets and are the most affected by inflation. Imagine an average worker watching more than half their paycheck evaporate into these essential costs. When everything gets more expensive, saving or investing feels impossible. The daily fight is just to keep the basics covered. And the most worrying part? These costs are unavoidable. You can cut back on dining out or switch to a cheaper laundry detergent. But how do you reduce your rent or insurance? This is where a financial mindset shift is essential, because without clear strategies, the cycle of scarcity never ends. With housing prices up 27% between 2020 and 2024, owning a home has become a financial nightmare for many families. Imagine paying twice as much for a mortgage just because of higher interest rates. This isn't fiction, it's the reality for anyone trying to buy a home today. Even renting, which should be a more affordable alternative, follows the same upward trend. This increase isn't just about numbers, it's redefining how people live. Sharing homes, delaying homeownership, or moving to less desirable areas are becoming the norm. And while this happens, the question remains: how can you protect your financial stability in such an unpredictable market? Owning a car in the United States used to symbolize freedom, but now it feels more like a financial burden. With the average price of new cars up 25% between 2020 and 2024, buying a vehicle is a challenge for many families. And it doesn't stop there. Maintenance, fuel, and fees are eating into budgets even more. Imagine someone who needs a car to work but realizes the total cost is nearly as high as their rent. If you think public transportation is a solution, the reality might disappoint you. In many areas, it's unreliable or non-existent, forcing more people to rely on expensive private transportation. This dilemma between necessity and cost only adds to the feeling of being financially trapped. How do you cut other expenses when transportation already takes so much? Grocery shopping has turned into a shock experience for many Americans. Between 2020 and 2024, food prices rose by an average of 20%, making even basic purchases a challenge. A dozen eggs that used to cost $2 can now cost $5, depending on where you live. It's as if every trip to the store drains a little more from already tight budgets. But it's not just groceries. Eating out has also become more expensive, with restaurants passing on their rising costs. Choices are shrinking. Either cut back on dining out or reduce your grocery cart at home. This climb in essential costs only underscores the urgency of finding creative ways to stretch every dollar. But what about the other rising expenses? Insurance, which is meant to provide security, has now become a financial burden. Between 2020 and 2024, car insurance costs rose by an astonishing 122%. For many, it feels like paying for a new car just to keep the old one protected. And it's not just vehicles. Health, home, and life insurance costs have also climbed, making full coverage almost unaffordable for some families. These increases force tough decisions: reduce coverage, take risks, or pay more to maintain the same protection. But what happens when an emergency arises and you're not insured? The emotional and financial toll of being unprotected only adds to the stress. And with healthcare costs also soaring, how can you balance all these rising expenses? Healthcare in the United States has always been costly, but between 2020 and 2024, it became even more expensive. The average cost of individual health insurance rose by 25%, leaving many in a cruel dilemma: pay or risk being without coverage. Imagine spending nearly a third of your paycheck just to have access to basic medical care. For many families, this is now a reality. And it's not just insurance. Medications, doctor visits, and procedures are draining even more money. This forces some people to delay treatments or seek out risky alternatives to save. With fixed expenses like this rising continuously, the question remains: where does this cycle end? Official inflation numbers say prices have increased by about 21% between 2020 and 2024, but the reality tells a different story. For those spending most of their income on housing, transportation, and healthcare, the inflation they experience is far greater. Imagine hearing that inflation is under control while your grocery bill and rent keep increasing every month. It's almost like they're measuring a reality that isn't yours. The problem lies in how inflation is calculated. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, uses a basket of goods that includes everything from toys to food, diluting the impact of essential cost increases. Meanwhile, families feel the real pressure every day as they try to maintain the same lifestyle. If the numbers don't reflect your reality, how can you plan your finances based on them? The real estate market has become a minefield. Between 2020 and 2024, home prices increased by 27%, but the true impact lies in the mortgages. With interest rates skyrocketing, monthly mortgage payments jumped by 77%. It's like paying double for the same home, just because of higher interest rates. For many, this means delaying the dream of home ownership or turning to renting, which is also more expensive. What was supposed to be a safe investment has become a financial burden. And while this happens, the growing inequality is clear. Those who already own property see their wealth grow, while others remain stuck in the cycle of expensive rent and no ownership. How can you build wealth when housing costs consume almost everything? While the average American struggles with rising costs, investors are thriving. The S&P 500 grew about 80% between 2020 and 2024, creating a bigger gap between those who invest and those who don't. Imagine someone who invested $1,000 in an S&P 500 ETF in 2020. This money would have nearly doubled. But the problem is that many don't even know where to start. This growth is no accident. It shows the power of long-term investing. Still, many hesitate, thinking investing is too complicated or risky. The secret is to start small, consistently. Simple tools like ETFs or index funds allow anyone to participate in the market. But are people ready to shift their mindset and make investing a priority? The US GDP grew by 36% between 2020 and 2024, but is this growth real? When the government injects billions into the economy through deficit spending, the number goes up, but at the cost of massive debt. In 2024, the federal deficit hit $1.8 trillion, showing that much of the growth was supported by money the country didn't have. This creates a dangerous trap. Economic growth may look good, but it comes with currency devaluation and rising prices. For those living paycheck to paycheck, this means the cost of living goes up while the value of money goes down. So, how long can this model sustain itself before the consequences hit everyone? When the government spends more than it earns, the result is a deficit, and someone has to foot the bill. Between 2020 and 2024, the US ran trillion-dollar deficits, partly financed by printing money. This might seem like an easy fix, but it devalues the dollar, reduces purchasing power, and fuels inflation. For the average American, it feels like watching their money lose value while the cost of living skyrockets. This practice doesn't just affect the present, it creates a financial burden for future generations. More money printed means more debt and more inflation, creating a cycle that hits the middle class hardest. Meanwhile, prices keep rising, and families struggle to stay financially stable. What happens when this cycle hits its breaking point? Dollar depreciation is a direct blow to the middle class. Every time the government prints more money, it dilutes the value of every dollar in circulation. For those living paycheck to paycheck, this means everything, from rent to food, becomes more expensive, while earnings stay the same. It's like working harder but getting less in return. And the impact goes beyond daily purchases. Depreciation affects savings, retirement funds, and long-term investments. Those without access to financial strategies are hit the hardest, watching their financial prospects shrink. How do you protect your income when your money is worth less every day? The relationship between home prices and the average American income has reached alarming levels. In 2024, the average cost of a home was 7.25 times the annual income, surpassing the peak in 2008. This means that even those with decent salaries are struggling to buy homes. For many, the only option is to delay homeownership or move to more affordable areas. This rise in housing costs redefines how people live. Rent, which should be a relief, is also out of control. Without property ownership to build wealth, the middle class faces a growing financial strain. How can you balance these rising expenses when everything seems tilted against the average consumer? The divide between investors and workers has never been more evident. While many are struggling to pay bills, those with money invested in stocks or real estate have seen their wealth grow significantly between 2020 and 2024. Imagine someone who invested $1,000 a month in an S&P 500 ETF during this period. That money would have almost doubled. Meanwhile, those who rely solely on their wages are watching their purchasing power shrink. This divide isn't just economic, it's also educational. Many don't have access to the knowledge or tools to begin investing, perpetuating the cycle of inequality. But for those who understand the game, even small steps can significantly change financial trajectories. Has the time come to rethink how we manage and apply the money we earn? Relying solely on a salary in today's economy is like building a house on sand, unstable and full of risks. That's why saving and investing have become more than just good financial practices. They're essential survival strategies. Consider the 75-15-10 system. 75% for spending, 15% for investments, and 10% for savings. Sticking to this simple plan can transform your financial life and open doors to a more secure future. But how do you get started? Small steps are key. If you've never invested before, start with something like an S&P 500 ETF. Meanwhile, savings can begin by cutting unnecessary expenses, like subscriptions you don't use. It's like sharpening your tools before building something great. You might not see the results immediately, but every penny saved and invested is a brick in your path to financial freedom. Long-term investing is like planting seeds for a future harvest. Tools like ETFs, particularly those that track the S&P 500, offer an easy way to build wealth without needing to be a market expert. Imagine investing $100 a month in an ETF like SPY and, over time, watching that money grow thanks to the power of compound interest. It's a process that rewards patience and consistency. The greatest benefit of passive investing is its simplicity. You don't need to monitor the market daily or try to predict trends. Just stay focused on the long term. Plus, when the market drops, it's an opportunity to buy more at a lower price, increasing your future gains. But how do you overcome the fear of starting and take advantage of these opportunities, even during uncertain times? In times of crisis, where many see problems, investors see possibilities. When markets drop, stock prices become more accessible, creating the perfect opportunity for those with long-term vision. Think back to 2008. While many sold their stocks in panic, others saw it as a buying opportunity and made significant profits in the years that followed. It's a game of patience and courage. Adopting this mindset requires emotional resilience. Instead of following the crowd, those who thrive in a crisis buy when others are fearful. A simple strategy, like regularly investing in an S&P 500 ETF, can turn moments of uncertainty into periods of financial growth. But are we ready to see crises as opportunities? History shows that no matter how tough the crises, the American economy always finds a way to recover. From the Great Depression to the more recent recessions, the market has shown unwavering resilience. For those investing with a long-term outlook, each market dip is followed by a new peak. It's almost as if the economy is designed to reward those who remain patient. However, this resilience doesn't mean the path is easy. Moments of crisis can be terrifying, but they're also unique opportunities to enter the market and build wealth. The key is learning from the past and preparing for the future. Now that you understand this, how will you act to ensure you're on the right side of the next economic recovery? Now that you understand what's really going on behind the headlines and why so many families are struggling to stay afloat, the choice is yours. Keep repeating the same cycle or take control of your financial future. Are you ready to do what few people are willing to do and start saving, investing, and planning strategically? If so, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you'll continue to learn how to turn knowledge into financial power and seize opportunities that most people overlook. Let's change your financial reality together, because the future starts with the decisions you make today.